discussion. All yours, Marius.
Thank you, Erlend, and thank you for the very warm welcome the past days in Oslo. Harkan, Melle, Jonas also, thank you for getting everything in order. Amandine, I don't know, she's not here yet, but I feel very welcomed, and the workshop was very nice with the students yesterday. So I'll give my talk. It's an ongoing research at RWTH Aachen about how AI has a kind of sensitivity for our cultural texture. It's open. Of course, there's many kind of you can have a lot of critiques on AI about its use of energy and its kind of focus on some cultural emphasizing of cultural biases, but it's here, and I think I want to know what it is and how it works, because otherwise other people will tell their story, and I think this story maybe connects to a lot more of our profession than the story that the people who built the technology want to make. So cultural texture, maybe to explain, I'm also going to give a little bit of kind of explanations of how the AI works in between the kind of research, because it's good to have a bit of context. But maybe then just to start with large language models, the thing we all use. I'm sure you've all used ChatGPT, but in a way, ChatGPT isn't really what it appears to be. No, we use it as a kind of entity, as a kind of being you're talking to. But actually, behind this entity, there is a kind of pattern extender, and ChatGPT is now based on GPT-5. When ChatGPT got launched, it was based on GPT 3.5. But before that, you had GPT-2 and GPT-1. And there, this whole kind of chatbot interface was not yet built. And how it worked then was that you would type a text, and it would just somehow continue that text. So if you would start writing a song lyric, it would continue writing a song lyric. If you would start writing a recipe, it would continue writing a recipe. And if you would, so it somehow it was a kind of really a pattern extender. And this chat bot is basically a kind of starting text that these kind of companies developed based on this kind of GPT interface. And it just first reads a text that says I'm a helpful assistant and I answer questions, and then this is the question, and then you type the question that you don't see, but it always puts that in the machine with the kind of thing that you ask it, and then it just extends that kind of prompt. But so basically underneath the hood, it's not a kind of intelligent being. It's really a kind of prediction model that predicts the next most logical character in a sequence, and which is actually for me kind of exciting, because we have, of course, always try to build these kind of intelligent machines, and we always try to do it from a kind of deterministic way. So that's called symbolic AI. That's an AI where you try to give it all our rules. You say, hey, this is a sentence structure, and then grammar works like this, and then these words have this meaning, and that word has that meaning, and then you're trying to teach it everything we know as we go about as kind of deterministic people ourselves, and then you hope that the chatbot somehow does the same thing. But then there were these kind of very predictable kind of machines, and suddenly by somehow breaking it down to the kind of smallest character, and just seeing this kind of enormous kind of data set where it can draw predictions from, it's not just able to extend the text based on a kind of grammatical level, but it's really able to understand emotion, culture, meaning, intent. It's a lot wider, no? And of course, the question is, does it really understand? It seems to understand, and that's maybe the most important part for the research at the moment. Now I have to go to my presentation. Voila, this works. visually, this works very similarly. So here we asked AI a while ago to extend this kind of palimpsestial existing base, and you can see if you look at the options side by side that it's really aware of the kind of time layers that are present in the kind of base, and that it's able to somehow tell historically plausible stories based on the kind of input that you give it. So if you somehow see the kind of cultural precedents that we see in real life around us based on this kind of layering of this kind of plinth. So, and for me, this is a moment that you say it's not just a kind of visual pattern extender. It doesn't just look at kind of things graphically. It really somehow brings in a kind of cultural layer to this kind of texture extension. So if you apply it in the city, you take a kind of a junction in the city between two existing buildings, and you ask the AI to somehow connect them in ways that could be plausible. And it's using the kind of architectural languages of the neighboring buildings to somehow to make kind of suggestions for the kind of interaction. In that sense, I feel that somehow this kind of AI could be very closely aligned to this kind of idea of the analogous architecture, no? The idea of the city as a kind of treasure chest of languages and styles, and that somehow a new building somehow has to somehow extend these kind of stories or have a conversation with these stories, no? The AI model also learns by making analogies. So if you would be able to store all the data in the world in the computer, it would of course never fit. It would never be small enough to be able to calculate with it. So they have to somehow condense all the data into a kind of very small, kind of efficient summary somehow. And they make the summary by making analogies, so that they look for kind of parallels within the kind of a data set, and then these are somehow collapsed down into one point, and that somehow allows for a kind of a quicker decision making. So, of course, then now this kind of story of the analogy of the facade is a kind of very beautiful traditional architectural story, which we can do a lot with. And in the studios in Aachen, we've always been doing these kind of funny games, like seeing what would happen if the kind of Ratu set would be extended in their original style, or maybe the Hagestuen would somehow reconvert the whole kind of style. And in a way, during the time of Rossi, this was kind of very popular idea. It was, of course, also this kind of idea, this kind of time where this kind of theories of structuralism came about, where the world is somehow, instead of you cannot somehow collapse the world down into a kind of distilled system, but it's all about the relations between all the points. And besides Rossi, you also had Jenks, who was trying to somehow, instead of categorizing each style separately, trying to show how all these styles would somehow flow into each other, and yeah, how they would relate. And of course, you have to imagine that this diagram was made in 1970. So then we also somehow imagined the kind of future flow of these kind of styles, and maybe we already had the kind of nature revival, I guess so, the space colonial, maybe that's a few decades onward. Yeah. And if you look at this kind of cross section of this AI model, you also could distill these kind of concepts. So this is something that's called an activation atlas, and it's, you have to imagine that this AI is a kind of multi-dimensional graph with kind of a lot of axes. Maybe one axis is the axis of if you talk about human faces, one axis is the axis of male to female, another axis is the axis of curly hair to straight hair, another axis is the axis of skin color, nose width, etc., etc. you can in a way make a kind of two-dimensional slice through this kind of multi-billion, multi-dimensional model and show how the AI sees kind of one layer of this kind of pie. And it's kind of very exciting to then see how the AI somehow organizes things. No? So here you have kind of ships, and then slowly the ships go into cars, and the cars go into horses, and the horses go into deer, birds, and then cats, and then anyway. So that, but it's what's very beautiful, of course, is that these kind of analogies are less constrained by our own kind of cultural preconceptions. No, we wouldn't connect a horse to a car in that sense, but here it's formally in a way one and the same. So in that sense, I do think there could be even though the argument is that AI just gives us what we once made. I do think there can be originality in the AI because there's of course many analogies that we haven't somehow explored it between the kind of pieces that we know. Yeah, and then here this idea that somehow this kind of AI is almost a kind of proof of structuralism, or maybe even a proof of post-structuralism, because instead of just looking at the system from the outside, you're inside the system and you're modifying as you go along. So this is then one of these kind of very early AI models, the GANs, the Generative Adversarial Network. These were like two machines that were competing. One was making images and the other one was comparing them against the data set and saying, this is correct, this is not correct, this is correct, this is not correct. And here you can indeed very clearly see, in a way here, we're like walking through this kind of multi-dimensional cloud of kind of variations and finding in between versions within that. Sliding between male and female, sliding between skin colors, sliding between hair type, age, going in all directions. And of course, the human face is a very consistent data set, no? Because the eyes are always above the nose is in the middle, the ears on the side, the hair is on top. So it somehow doesn't get more consistent than that. So this is an hour-long video which we could watch. It's also would be a very fun lecture, but I don't have time for this. There's also an hour-long video of imaginary kitchens. But here you can see that they were not so pure with their data set. No, they just grabbed Flickr and they somehow collected this kind of enormous batch of images and just put it in, and there's less kind of consistency than a human face, and therefore there's less logic found. So with the students in Aachen, we at that point tried to do the same, but we tried to look for more consistent data sets. So here you can see these kind of texture press bedrooms. Jonas suggested that I should shrink the kind of frames as I go into the book so that they get smaller and smaller. So this is a kind of tip that I took from Jonas. And then here you can see the kind of generated bedrooms that come out of it. And of course the kind of clumsiness of the AI of that time is also kind of very exciting. Of course it does then now keep the consistent moments, as kind of these large beds inside of the room, the kind of the line of the ceiling, it keeps consistent. The verticality of the cupboards and the curtains, it keeps consistent. So there in the lights as kind of little bulbs floating around is kind of exciting. And maybe even for me is looking at these then closely and really giving attention to what is generated. They are actually a kind of very exciting spaces. Another observation that I have about AI is that if you think about what is an image, a painting is somehow an image that somebody worked on for a very long time, and you can only look at it for a fraction of the time that the painter put into it. So you will never somehow see as much as the painter saw in his painting. A photograph is somehow the reverse, where the photograph is taken and snapped in a kind of fraction of a second, and you're able to look at it for much longer. You are able to find more things in the moment than maybe somebody saw at the moment. This kind of idea of the generated image is of course also very exciting because it's stored on the hard drive, and nobody's seen that image yet. No, you're like the first one to somehow open up that image and then become almost like an author of that image by somehow saying, finding things in that image. So it's a real kind of exciting thing, almost like you're walking through a city, going around a corner and seeing something that nobody discovered yet. And here they feel very much like this kind of Luigi Caccia Dominioni interiors, no? So maybe these American bedrooms suddenly become this kind of Milanese interiors. Another kind of consistent data sets, the kind of Pompeian wall murals, a lot of horizontals, a lot of verticals, a lot of layering, consistent colors. And here you can then somehow see these Pompeian wall murals floating into each other like Scottish tartans. And then a kind of very traditional architecture set, the kind of facades drawn by Ville Ledoux. Claude Nicolas de Ledoux. Yeah, a great variety of fantasy houses that were never built, but that have amazing floor plans. But the AI is not so good with floor plans, so we kept it with the facades, and we put these in the kind of dataset, and we then asked the AI to somehow generate this kind of in-between versions. And here you can see this kind of architectural language of the vertical and the horizontal, and the kind of the base and the kind of head returning very clearly in this kind of data set, and it knows very well what to do. And I also like this idea, if you then think about this Charles Jenks diagram, that it will also design future projects like apartment buildings that are somehow contained in the data but were not envisioned yet by Ledoux. Okay, then how we apply it in the studios. So in the beginning, we were also really asking the AI to design, to ask the AI to somehow make a design based on the kind of structure of the building as found. No? This is a campus in Brussels, university campus, and from the 80s. And we asked the AI to somehow make an intervention based on the kind of texture of the building as found. So there's no authorship of the student here, it's purely the authorship of the building itself that's designing its own kind of future. And for me that also connects very, very closely to this kind of story of the kind of reuse of elements, seeing the building as a kind of repository of material and allowing to dismantle the building and out to reassemble the building, and by somehow having a design tool that somehow works with this kind of these parts of the building, it somehow stays within that language and somehow doesn't clash. You don't need something new to somehow find the new and the old in that sense. So then the question is, where does AI sit in our practice today, or how could I imagine AI in our practice today? Maybe today this kind of story of material reuse. Maybe we see the building site today like this, with the site as found, with a lot of influences going into that site. And then from that site, there's material untouched, material reused, material discarded, and they go into the new site as designed. And then there's offsite material, new and reused. And then there's a new authorship that somehow brings it all together. And then these materials that are taken from the site as found will somehow carry kind of cultural meaning along with the kind of material qualities of these materials. But in a way, the story is mainly communicated through material, and there's no kind of direct link between the cultural and the site as designed beyond, of course, us as authors ourselves. And in a way, you could say that artificial intelligence is somehow could be this kind of bricoleur that works alongside you, that somehow is able to take these kind of original cultural values that are put into a building and also implement them in the site as found along with our own authorship. So here another early test, this kind of Kölner Domplomper. where the Cologne Cathedral was damaged in the Second World War. Here a proposal by a patch and match algorithm to somehow fill that in based on the surrounding patches. And then here a more contemporary AI that somehow looks at the surrounding texture and designs this kind of gap using the language of the building itself. And then I'm really thinking, yeah, okay, now we then build it again, and it's the way it was. But maybe this kind of fractured version tells also something about the history and doesn't somehow, yeah, allows to tell a different story. And there, I feel AI could also be this kind of designer that somehow has this kind of causal quality. No, if we design something as humans, it's always intended. It's always there's a kind of ratio behind it, or it becomes kind of fake if you try to do it. But then there's many beautiful moments in buildings like here in Florence, where there was this kind of moment in history where they wanted to connect two spaces that weren't connected before, and they didn't line up, and they had to design this kind of angled kind of connection. And there's this kind of causal design moment where there's no clear author that designed this kind of moment, but it's still a kind of moment that then calls for interpretation of the user. And there's also examples of weathering and wear and traces of use that somehow influence the kind of makeout of a building that often we feel very much at home in buildings because we become the authors ourselves. Just like walking in nature, nobody made the nature around you. You are the one that someone has to author that kind of space. And somehow an AI designed space also can have that quality where it's somehow there's no kind of other author at play there. So that's a very exciting thing to not just let that happen, but to also have that within the kind of design tool set on the desk beyond the kind of real life history. Pictures in painting. So a lot of these kind of techniques don't start off as architectural design techniques. A lot of methods we just thought of ourselves, but they always start off with these kind of papers that are made by this kind of computer science researchers. And this is this kind of method called inpainting. So there's here on the second row, you can see original images, some are images that they put in, and then they masked the input. So they somehow hid part of the kind of image. And then the idea for the AI is to somehow repair that image based on the kind of context, so that it's fixed again, so that you didn't see there was something wrong. So it's really a kind of fixing, but for me there could be a lot of creativity in that kind of fixing. So there it somehow starts this kind of different way of looking at it. We did this kind of architectural graphic tests where we somehow put two kind of languages together and then said to the computer it's broken, try to fix it, and then we could see how then these kind of two cultural textures would grow together and make a new design. And then it's these kind of little tests on the kind of level of furniture where you make a very rough collage of pieces, and then the AI somehow connects them or thinks of details how to somehow put these together. Or here buildings of the Verder Interieur, where we just modeled fragments of them, put them together in a kind of spatial grid, and asked the AI to somehow extend them and connect them. And then we modeled the kind of design the AI proposed, and then we did it again and again and again, creating these kind of spaces that are, again, not completely intentional. So now a lot of the research also happens in these kind of books. The past semester we've been making 12 books, each of 500 pages. With AI, everything goes super quick. It's a lot of work to just get the data organized. And I will just show you a few of these books to give you a sense of the things that we found. This is the first book I will show you, Facade Inpainting. I've already talked a bit about inpainting here in a way, this kind of bath University complex by the Smithsons, and the kind of extension to the top. And here you can see it wasn't very culturally aware, because a lot of these roofs the Smithsons would have never somehow proposed. But if you make the mask on the right hand side, there you can see that for me a lot of these kind of extensions that it somehow proposed feel like very close to that kind of place and to that kind of era of architecture and to these specific designers. So here it is able to go down into this kind of multidimensional data set and find the kind of space where it needs to generate that it somehow is connected to this kind of original architecture. And more that you start to generate these kind of things, you start to kind of somehow see you start to see how the AI is thinking. So, for instance, here we somehow this is then the mask that we put in. We took this herald here above the gate and moved it up, and then asked it to generate everything on top. And of course, a high herald often means that it's a kind of big kind of defensive system. So it somehow designed these kind of more militarized tops based on this kind of high herald. Of course, this is all speculation, but it's very nice that this AI allows you to somehow look at your own kind of culture and try to find these kind of logics, because it's somehow consistently making these kind of proposals based on the kind of architecture that it somehow is gotten. So this is another part of this Staalgen Gaugen book. I showed the Staalgen test before with these kind of facades moving in each other, but there was also a second part, this kind of Gaugen part. And that's somehow a way to get more control. We try to also have a very old technique, so this is before the current era of AI, but it's still nice to see. It looks very clumsy because it's a 3-year-old technique. But we took these kind of Bonnard paintings, and then back then you had to then mask out each part. So you had to say, this is a table, this is a chair, this is a curtain, this is a door, and then it would know what to generate in each place. But it somehow still then was aware of the kind of door next to the opening and the light coming in and the reflection on the table. So there were then semantic relationships that it was able to do between these parts. And what was also nice with this AI is that there's then a lot of kind of these old images can also get new life. So then in a more recent techniques, you get these kind of video models where you can then move into images, and then suddenly this kind of clumsy image becomes a kind of more physical image. And also photographs that I once took in hotel rooms suddenly are then traversable and become these kind of very nice spatial things. Here I was also still looking for the glitches, but the glitches are getting less and less, and the AI is getting better and better. So there's less creativity in the glitches, but only in other parts. And the next step will also really be this is presented 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this is kind of world model. And you give it an image, and then you can move around with your arrows in that image, no? And you can type what you want to do. So if you want to open the door, you can type open the door, and then it will just generate the next images based on what you're asking it to do. So as an architect, you could really imagine that you make a first collage of your building, and then if you want to know what's around the corner in your image, then you also can just start walking in your own kind of initial image to maybe get inspired by what you somehow get. Yeah, and also go in strange places. But also then as discover spaces that are maybe dear to us to look around the corners. But still, the streets are quite empty. In a way, with this kind of very old technique, we also already were trying to peel back the layers. So we then also drew the image in layers, but then also took away the layers before, so you could look behind the wall and see the nature behind the wall, and then see the room without the table, and then see the curtains inside, and then the chairs, and then the table. And here you can see this reflection in the table on top of it. And then maybe today these kind of tests are a bit more easy to make. We did it with the students a lot. It was very fun. These are earlier tests where somehow here again this kind of style image. We drew kind of abstracted facades, and then we just asked it to generate these kind of abstracted facades using the kind of original facade. And you can see how it somehow pushes itself to somehow fit to the kind of architectural logic of that facade. So again, to prove this kind of concept of this kind of cultural texture, if you look at this kind of style and the kind of composition, where the composition is clearly a kind of modern building, it somehow does look for a kind of more contemporary version of this kind of medieval facade, and maybe you then end up at a kind of turn of the century British architecture, this arts and crafts legends, and maybe you then indeed find, even on the kind of architectural scale, an architecture that's somehow in between this medieval and this kind of modern reality. So it maybe even plots out that scale based on our own kind of cultural progression. Then if you have a more Dutch facade, you can see that you can become more graphical. It's able to somehow design better with that. You could even ask a 3D model to a video model to then look around the corner, and then based on the kind of cultural texture of the front, it somehow designs the back. Or you could somehow fly around it and see the kind of context, and here you can clearly see that it does know this facade is a Dutch facade because the kind of context is also quite Dutch. Even cleaner design. So here on the top you can always see the kind of style and composition. Here I put in a more contemporary facade by Bedoel de Brouwer, and then an abstracted drawing, and then these kind of designs that it produces. Or here a more historic facade with a kind of very disparate collection of materializations, like this Herzog and the Morgan Graubünden archive in Germany, where it really is able to capture this kind of, it's not just a kind of visual image, graphical image, it's really able to capture the kind of membrane structure of that image and the layeredness of that image, and even looking at it around in 3D, it reflects in the way you would expect such a facade to reflect. Then this kind of research that we did before this, but still it somehow comes in the story after now, and that's somehow to let facades of existing architects design each other. So here they have a facade by Victor Horta, Leon Steinen, and 51N4E. And if you somehow ask, use one as a composition and another one as a kind of style, you can design kind of many in-between facades where it's trying to imagine the layout of the one using the materialization of the other. And definitely if you then go to this kind of 51N4E plaster facade, it actually comes up with solutions that are kind of buildable in our current kind of time frame, which is of course very exciting to not always make fantastical kind of images, but make something that is usable at hand. So in a way, the kind of technology that's underneath this is this kind of neural style transfer, and just like this in-painting technique, it was never meant as a kind of design tool. It was meant to somehow take a kind of painting here, Dutch, Norwegian, our two cultures, And then somehow transform an image using that style of that painting. But what I really like is that somehow then these kind of architectural styles are also just like painterly styles, and just like in this kind of activation atlas where we saw that cars and boats and horses could actually be on the kind of same scale. This idea that kind of painterly styles and architectural styles in a way could somehow have similar kind of chargings of cultural value, that the kind of choices how the kind of Baroque details should work actually are similar than how a brushstroke could be applied to the painting. It's for me a very exciting thing that these things are not disparate fields, but actually very much connected. So we often start with this kind of collection of photographs, which I took on my travels, and then again we combine them, and then here you can see it's like in between buildings, between these three facades that we just saw. Mm. And then in the book, it's a bit of a matrix where on the top you have the three source materials, and then here you have the composition of the top image, and on this row you have the kind of style of the top image, and then the style of the second and the composition of the second, and in that way you get all the possible combinations to see which buildings are somehow exist between these kind of two authorships of these kind of styles. And also as a kind of didactical tool, it's very exciting to be able to talk about space and form and materialization and style, and somehow be able to separate them and to somehow reapply them. It just becomes a kind of very useful thing. So here, a joke of a kind of a Dutch facade from the 80s, reinterpreting a kind of brick facade of Holland, and then applying a kind of brick style back on that facade to somehow rediscover its original tectonics. And a lot of these kind of nice results that came out. Also with interiors, we did the same thing. Now we go beyond the workshop yesterday. We just looked at facades there. Again, a kind of collection of spaces. And then this kind of style, and then this kind of spatial conditions, and then the ability to kind of push this kind of style into these kind of spatial conditions is a very exciting thing. And then finding spaces in between. And also for me, as a kind of personally, I kind of like it because, of course, I have been in the space and I've been in the style. And to somehow be in a space that I've somehow been in, but of course haven't been in, is a kind of very exciting thing to me. Here the other one. And then here it also then clearly says that Zumthor is a much more classicist than Robert van Dam, because you can see that this kind of space very much resonates with this kind of classical rooms. So there also matrix is there. Or another kind of nice observation is then here we have a kind of a space, and then we're going to apply these kind of three styles to that space. But the funny thing is that in this image on the left, you have a window and you can look out into the park. But in these images, there's stained glass, or here it's too bright, so there's no window there, so you cannot really look out. So what will it do with the window? That's a kind of exciting thing. And then if you look at these generations, is then it goes into this kind of latent space of the model, and it finds a kind of outside space that's connected to the kind of style of the interior. So this is a kind of this is of course the kind of space that is really there. But here you have the kind of Italian Catholic exterior, and here this kind of more Nordic exterior. So it also tells us something about the kind of local genius loci of the kind of architecture. So maybe we can have the conversations again about, instead of about global architecture, about the kind of local, the kind of really the style for the kind of space. This is almost like a religious institute. But then also using a video model to then see what could be around the corner, how does that kind of square really look like. Unfortunately, it's only 7 seconds, so if we just stop before we really can see. And then here are these kind of new found spaces between spaces that are really there. Sometimes something goes wrong, so you try to generate a kind of moving video, but then the AI gives you something different. But still, it does say something about this space, which is a Hans Schouwen spatial condition with a Dutch farm as a kind of style. But that in this kind of style, this kind of elderly woman clearly lives, and not anymore kind of young couple, no? So there's this kind of context that the model has, this kind of awareness of the kind of cultural texture that somehow does generate something meaningful in that sense. Okay, these are just some nice images. The next project. So here we're now also trying to compare the AI to the kind of human, the artificial neural network versus the biological neural network. Because in a way, as I said before, all the way at the beginning, and with this kind of Astronaut example, in the studios before AI, we've always done this kind of translation games. In a way, Rotterdam Hybreza is also a translation game of the kind of architecture of the city, and to see how these buildings can, in a way, design their own extensions instead of fragmenting it further, making kind of bigger kind of ensembles within the city. So we have a lot of material to somehow redo, and this is a publication that's about to be released soon with older student work. And it's this kind of the students made these kind of rhino models, hard labor. So yeah, the kind of workshop could also have been a lot more intense if you would have liked. And they also made these kind of industrial kind of structures. And then they tried to redesign these industrial structures using these kind of styles of these kind of historic architectures. And we're really trying to apply the kind of logic. So if there's a cross in the industrial structure, there doesn't have to be a cross in the kind of design, but they really, this is then the Römischer Bäder by Schinkel, which are then used to then redesign this industrial structure. This is the original, and here again the original and the kind of Schinkelized version. And then we also asked the AI to somehow make the same kind of comparison. So we gave it the same kind of styles and composition. This is not really fair comparison, because here we use the classical style and here we use the Gothic style. This is the student work, by the way. This is the AI's work, but you will get a better idea of it in a second. So here you can see that this AI using this kind of classical model. So here you can see the kind of model of the industrial structure, the model of the kind of classical detail, and then here you can see the kind of designs that come out that are trying to reinterpret this kind of industrial structure using this detail. Another beautiful moments come out. Also, all the descriptions are done by AI. Looking at the AI looks at the image. The shallow loggia transitions from a gentle curve to a straight plane. The lower relief colonnade offers a subtle play of light across the rusticated stone of the facade. So also there, for looking at architecture, to also ask the AI to look with you and to maybe discover things that you didn't see yourself. This can also be and kind of exciting component of it all. Here then the Duomo in Milano, redesigning this kind of Pennsylvania coal mine. Or I don't know what it is. Yeah, creating these beautiful layered facades. These buttresses are introduced based on this. Or here this cathedral of Velodrome in France, redesigning this industrial structure. Yeah, this is just to give you an impression. And then this, of course, this incredible complexity. So I know that the use for design practices is not yet directly there, but definitely in a kind of 3D world digitally, you're then also able to take these kind of images and then generate a 3D model from that. So based on one image, it's able to somehow figure out this is the kind of depth of that part, that's the depth of that part. And so it somehow starts with a kind of rough generation, and slowly it somehow keeps on making iterations until it somehow aligns up to the reference image. And if it somehow found that shape, then it will somehow give you a kind of a 3D model of the kind of thing that you made. So it does become already a little bit more real spatially, even though it's still in a kind of digital kind of realm. Maybe this technology was invented in the wrong time frame. Yeah, and then the next book, Green Space, Junk Space. We had a studio where we were trying to prove a kind of correlation between these kind of neoliberal junk spaces in the city, and that somehow they had a kind of natural quality because somehow all orders were lost, and that in a way you could somehow enjoy the city because you would just walk through these kind of messy jungles of objects and just consider it as a kind of beautiful informal moment in the city. And then to prove that, we somehow redesigned these green space using junk spaces and then reverse. This is a little 2 week exercise that we did before we then went to the design project. And so here you can see Palin's kind of proposal where she gets a green space, she gets a junk space, and then below you get like the green space re-envisioned using the junk space, and the junk space re-envisioned using the green space. And then we gave these same source images to AI, and then you get this, no? Which already for me feels like a very beautiful garden. I would love to read a book in this garden. Here another example of GAF combining these green and junk spaces. And here, if you then start to compare this artificial neural network versus this biological neural network, so here you can see that GAF somehow recreated these trees by stacking these kind of bay rope, I don't know what they're called, where you tie the rope on. She made these trees, and actually this AI somehow made the same kind of choice to somehow to solve that kind of mismatch. So that's a very exciting thing for me, that the good students and the AI somehow are making the same choices. Here a student's work by Vincent. A front garden in Palm Springs, and a front garden in The Hague, and then the reverse on the bottom made by hand, and then here the AI versions on the bottom made by AI. And these are then the AI versions here. A highway in Tokyo and a kind of central square in Isfahan, and then here on the bottom the kind of reverse of these kind of spaces, and then here the AI's version that somehow tries to do the same operations. And you can still see the highway, this kind of long bazaar wall translation of the square in Isfahan. Of course, the original square is much more beautiful. Or here a trailer park in Belgium and a kind of Dutch village in the north, and the kind of reverse. And here creating this kind of this strange kind of typology of this kind of traditional Dutch architecture, but then in a kind of spatial condition or a height that you would never have, which of course is then a very novel space that it makes. A ranch in Las Vegas and a kind of courtyard in Barcelona, man-made by Delora. This is the proposal, so even someone makes kind of flower pots with kind of these kind of little lights standing in here, the kind of AI alternative, almost religious. And then the students also decluttered these spaces, so they took out all the objects to somehow, of course, because of course junk space is made by junk, so you also have to somehow separate the space from the junk. And then here we use the AI to again combine the pieces, no? So here the flower pot with the kind of I don't know what was used for that. I'm sorry. Or here another kind of decluttering of these kind of spaces. And then here you can see on the left, the top, the inputs, so the composition is then the tree, and the style is then the kind of postcard stand. And then on the left you have the student work where they designed this kind of tree made out of that, and on the right you have the kind of AI's alternative. But these are very, very exciting to me as a kind of technological flowers in that sense. Or here this Isfahan trees using the highway of Tokyo. Good, next book. I'm just going through all the books. I hope you're still enjoying yourselves. A project we did together with East in London, which are making very beautiful parks and public space. And for a new project that they're working on, was a multi-games area. So it was a kind of, the fences were very important, and the play spaces were very important. So we made 2 books based on that. And this is a rough test. We're also somehow developing the technique as we're somehow going along. So here, these are all new fences. So these are AI generated fences, also based on existing fences. This is also a very beautiful one, just kind of woven structure inside. And again, this kind of looking at what was made, looking at what we find in this kind of AI is very exciting. And then, so it starts off with this kind of pictures. Also nice, my kind of photo app on my phone just recognizes fences, so I can just type fence, and then it gives me all the fences I ever saw in my life. And then we cut them all out on white to not make the AI confused about what it should do. It's a very beautiful fence by Gaudi, next to a Dutch fence on the left top, and then here you can then see the style that is put against the kind of composition. And again, based on the kind of material that it has. So here on the left is there's kind of thickly black painted cast iron fence, and you can see that the details are also this kind of cast iron. It's able to mend, but it's not able to make straight corners very well, and it's able, then there's this paint, this glossy paint on top, and then here there's a more rational fence, and you can see that it somehow, even though it gets this as a kind of input, it somehow has to stay more within this kind of folded kind of metal. Here this Gaudi fence, which it interprets as nuts, and here this kind of very, very simple fence where it really is just a kind of only straight lines, either vertical or diagonal. So, and then there's also this kind of, these are also then generated fences. And then it's this kind of question of crafts, no? So for me, what also was very exciting is that even though I never made a fence in my life, but because we generated 20,000 fences and then I had to select them, so I was mainly going through fences for days and days and days to somehow pick the ones that were meaningful. But because I then saw all these kind of different versions of a kind of cast iron, these different possible versions of a cast iron black painted fence, suddenly when I was in the city and I saw a cast iron black painted fence, I had a lot more kind of affinity to how that fence was made, no? And I understood much better the kind of detail and the, yeah, the kind of limits of its kind of craft. So it did even teach me something about making something real. There was a kind of phenomenological quality to that image that somehow was made me able to somehow touch it in that sense. So for me, that's also a very kind of promising thing for AI, that by simulating kind of reality in the digital space, you do get a better sense of reality because you've been in a way. I do visit a lot of buildings, but by looking at architecture books and learning from buildings on the page, you also learn how to build a building, even though you didn't visit all these buildings. In a way, by generating these kind of versions of reality based on the data set, you also get that kind of sensation. Then we made kind of very silly sketches to see if we could then steer these kind of designs in our own direction. And then these things came out, which were less buildable, but still nice to see. And you definitely see that somehow the wood, it needs to have a surface, so it closes it. Whereas if it's more fragile, it is able to open it. Okay, then we go on to the play spaces. And there we started off with these kind of toys. Here there are many toys in my house. My kids make nice stuff, and I just took these kind of pictures. They were also in my Google Photos data set. Search for toy, get all the toys, and then we use these kind of styles of this kind of London office to then redesign these toys. And then here you can see how that Lego toy turned into a kind of bench design for based on the kind of design that my daughter somehow made innocently. And then we made a larger selection of kind of space, furniture and objects, and then we made this kind of selection of kind of this kind of prior languages of this office of East, and then we started to combine them in different ways. And yeah, there's a lot of, yeah, again, it's just nice to look at all the things that you find, all the kind of designs that are proposed. And sometimes there was one with a kind of bunny, and it always tried to then find faces and animals from this kind of these stories, which is also kind of very cool. And then there was even a workshop, which was very exciting, that we somehow there was a workshop with the kind of kids of the neighborhood, and there was a kind of several construction objects there, and the kids would just live build kind of things, how they thought their play space should be. And then 5 minutes later, we would use the kind of other play spaces of East as a kind of style, and five minutes later, they would see what their play space could look like on a larger scale, which was an incredible nice thing, that there was this beautiful authorship by somehow the user. And also maybe if you think about your own client, it could also be a way to somehow keep control, not because you somehow control the style, you somehow define what the kind of extent of the style should be, and then the client somehow gets more freedom in somehow making a mess, and then you talk about the result in between. So I don't mean to be so disconcerting if the client makes a proposal. So these are all good play spaces. And it's nice when I see play spaces today. I was walking along this waterway next to the we were even at the park. What's the park called?
Kastler now.
The with the Indian hats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Klostrenga.
Klostrenga. There you then see these kind of structures and you think, well, these could be generated in their roughness somehow. Then the last kind of little context that I want to give, and then I'm going towards the end of the presentation. This idea of the texture somehow, to understand the image, the AI needs to first encode the image into the kind of into kind of a summary of the image, into a summary of that image, into a summary of that image, into a summary of that image, to just get a kind of very small set of numbers to then start calculating with, because otherwise if it had to calculate with the whole image, it somehow wouldn't make any sense, and then it somehow slowly decodes, so it slowly grows it and grows it and grows it and grows it, and then and here you can see in a way a bit how that all these layers also work, these layers of understanding. So this is also an old technique where it was still the other way around, where instead of generating an image, it would recognize an image inside of another image. That's another story. But you can see here it's trying to make a kind of dog face. And it starts off with the kind of lines, which is the kind of hierarchical lowest layer, the line. And then it's discovering eyes. So you can see there's a lot of eyes there. That's the kind of next layer. And then slowly it's discovering the two eyes and the noses together, and slowly it's then able to build up that kind of image. And of course, then everything then starts from noise. So these kind of current diffusion models, they start from kind of noise, and it slowly tries to find the image in the noise that you want to find. And in that sense, I'm wondering if there's this kind of, what I do find is that AI, more than us, has a great sensitivity to kind of texture and surface and weathering and wear, and therefore maybe we can also use kind of design tools that are more kind of rich. Of course, the photograph is of course kind of very detailed, kind of textured instrument. You don't have to abstract it to a kind of simplified drawing. But maybe if we start working with 3D models, we also use these kind of more richly textured 3D models. So here you have a 3D model by Malte, where he took photographs of this kind of developed interior house and put the actual bricks that were in the house on top of the facades, one to one. Or maybe contemporary scanning techniques like Gaussian splats here, where you put in a bunch of photographs and the computer calculates a kind of 3D model of the space as found. Were always these kind of clumsy, unhandy things, which were of course beautiful to look at, but you would never be able to cut and to design into it. But maybe with AI, if you would just be able to sketch on top and to then generate the kind of textures of the neighboring image to make the design, it somehow becomes a lot more natural then. And there's also this trend of this kind of photogrammetry scan. I think a lot of us are already using these. This was also very exciting. I could use all my pictures that I took of places that I once was, and I took so many pictures that I was able to generate 3D models of these kind of places that I visited. So I could re-enter these kind of places that I was years ago, and I could walk around on that day where I was. And then the students also use these models, and they went cutting and pasting, and they made kind of new spaces from them. Again, maybe also like AI, letting these kind of stories of these kind of found spaces define the shape of the kind of new design. But then maybe this could also then be a kind of base for the kind of next step, which is then to then maybe mend these kind of collages, these rough collages, together again in a consistent style. No, here you have this kind of moment in an airport where you just enter the kind of airplane, and there's all this kind of metallic detailing, and then this is then a kind of shaping of that space. But here you have an auto, and it becomes a kind of more auto-esque space. And maybe a design process could be this kind of very rough collaging of kind of architectures, and then binding that together with a kind of consistent style, finding a kind of new building between all these kind of found authorships. Yeah, the last thing that we're doing now, which I'm just showing for Erlend, Amandine, and Jonas, is this. We're redoing Rotterdam Vipresa. And this is just the start. So the students will be working on this the coming semester. So we did a few tests to start. So as Erlend was talking about, Rotterdam Vipresa is this book where we took Rotterdam and it's a book with a kind of envelope and transparencies in the envelope, and you can like put these kind of transparencies with these designs on top of the book. And then you somehow redesign the city in fragments. By chasing little fragments, you maybe change the city. And also the brief was that these fragments could only have the kind of language of Jonas' Darkornises. And here you have Erlend's and Amandine's wind halls. You could redesign the city using the existing buildings and then telling a new story with the kind of language of the buildings as found. So here you can see how that works. So each office would make a kind of proposal, and slowly this image would then grow. And then basically architecture would be brought down to a collection of fragments. And it would be a lot of an ecological argument that all these buildings could just remain, and you could still find a new city in the kind of city that you found. But now we're cutting out these buildings and making these buildings their own authors, and then seeing what else is in the city, what versions of these buildings are in the city, how these buildings would somehow design each other, and etc. etc. And the students will then make their. So first we're gonna redesign your proposals as close to your design as possible, and then the students are gonna bring it further to extend the cadaver, squeeze further and further and further again. Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. Just. Questions. It's always a lot. I also showed the last project because that's the last thing I want to say, and because it's a new thing I added. I also showed it because I think first of all AI will also be. Strange thing about AI is that instead of somehow becoming, most technologies first enter the kind of professional realm and then slowly trickle down into the kind of larger public realm. But AI is the reverse, no? It's like this public is running away with everybody uses AI in their daily life. But then professionally, we're trying to find what does it mean, how do we use it, no? And I think because it's this kind of borrowing authorship, taking things, changing things, putting yourself into things, this kind of very that is now becoming such a big part of our larger kind of culture society. We're so comfortable with somehow stealing authorship, sharing authorship, that maybe this idea of the city, of this kind of clearly defined authorships also with the larger public starts to dilute, no? And that people do not define that as closely anymore. So I think therefore also culturally we will change, not just the AI. We will not just change by using the AI, but we will change by the way we look at the world. And maybe this kind of Rotterdam Represa doesn't feel like such a kind of surreal proposal anymore in the near future. That's why I also need to show. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Question I have maybe like a discussion point, which actually is not what we were talking about. It reminds me of the world a little bit of like the appendix of Delirious New York and the world of Madeline recently, where the buildings came out of this crossing of different species, column style and column species, And so I was just wondering if you've ever had a conversation with her, because she's such an amazing character.
With who?
Madeline Wiesendorf.
Oh, Madeline Wiesendorf. Yeah.
It's just like it just. I was just when I was looking at that last bit on Rotterdam.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, well, it's like it really triggers that actually.
Yeah.
And they were doing that again, very early, but then it has this kind of.
Maybe it's a forward.
It's a forward, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it could be a kind of origin. No, I have not looked at that. That's a good one. But I think it's indeed. The nice thing is that the kind of. It's not new, no. The AI is somehow us. It's somehow the thing that we've always been doing, and that's somehow so exciting. And I think most people consider AI as a kind of flashy new thing that's somehow outside of us, or that would replace us. But I think it's not a chatbot. It's a kind of extension of the patterns that we somehow push out, and this kind of need to make analogies is also how we store information in our heads. No, it's also the way how we somehow summarize things by somehow finding things that are working in the same way, and by understanding one thing that you already know, understanding the new thing that you didn't know yet, but because it somehow connects, it overlaps, you somehow, rather than.
I have a question that's maybe a bit prosaic in a way in nature, but just in terms of its applicability to practice by someone who's like maybe mentally destroyed by being on building sites and drawing and building. But there seems to be like in the kind of, if you were to use it in the kind of workflow in professional setting, in the current state of affairs, it seems to sort of generate, in a way, like almost like an extra work accumulation, or like more work.
Yeah.
Because you're generating more iterations that will need interpretation.
Yeah.
Which you touched upon a little bit in terms of the 3D models.
Yeah.
So, which is a little bit similar to how we see in 3D scanning, that there's the proportion of editing versus actual survey. The editing is quite large.
Yeah.
The time it takes. So that's quite interesting to see whether you are aware of how if there are work being done, or developments being done in how to, I guess, extract more accurate, let's say, for example, 3D models or CAD or things like that from the images, because right now it's quite image-based. It's a pixel world in a way, and it is very sophisticated in that sense. Yet it seems to struggle, like you said, with plans, and I also tried it with plans. It just doesn't work yet in the same way. And I know there's AI being used for generating floor plans and in input technical.
But that's symbolic AI. Yeah.
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 So do you see signs of that technology sort of developing? Because I guess this is now accelerating when you look at how much investment is going into AI in general. Yet it seems to not move so much in this generative AI towards translating it into something concrete in terms of an architect's workflow.
Yeah. So there's always a question of that, and I also have this kind of urge to ask, to see. I mean, the fear is that AI will replace us, and then the first question is always how can AI replace us? I cannot see it replacing us yet. three answers to your question. One is that it maybe it's more part of an earlier design process. When I design, I always make a kind of ugly design or bad design before I make a good design, because I need to get a sense of what's the kind of extent of my design, no? And I think there, if you have rough ideas, to then test them out real quickly in AI to see how that looks like, will definitely somehow expand your kind of library of options that you can then apply later in your kind of handicraft manual design process in your old-fashioned program. No? So that's for me already there. I feel that will have a significant meaning. No? A second answer could be, I feel that maybe this idea of the 3D model as a kind of framework, it's of course a very kind of recent idea, no? Before that we never had 3D models as frameworks to make a design. And definitely if you look at kind of picturesque design practice, everything was done from the perspective and from it's all about the kind of experience from the kind of viewer's point of view rather than from the kind of plan and the ratio and the kind of system. No, it doesn't matter if the plan looks good, as long as the perspectives are good, it's a good project. So maybe this also then allows us to purely design from perspective for longer, and therefore maybe this kind of question of the kind of 3D model as a kind of, there's an artificial construct, of course.
Well, this is interesting because the 3D model is maybe become a bit of an issue in the way that we design, because we've removed ourselves a little bit from plan section elevation and that kind of abstraction, and maybe in a way maybe this can kind of put it back to that, because when you have to interpret these images, then you have to make those leaps yourself, and then you can work maybe better with scale, because what we see now, especially with the newer generation, is that by working 3D, you're scrolling in and out, and you're losing a sense of maybe proportion space. So maybe it's in a way, it's a kind of high-tech way to get some low-tech quality.
And the third answer would be that maybe it could be also more meaningful in a kind of low architecture environment. Maybe these kind of companies who have these kind of ready-made modular building systems, but maybe not yours, but a more kind of traditional kind of this in Belgium we have this kind of farmhouse style where everybody wants a kind of red brick farmhouse with this kind of, but they all look the same because they're not going to design a new farmhouse each time. No? But maybe this AI could somehow generate inspiration for the kind of clients, and they can pick, and there's no conversation about a design process. So it's then could be a kind of shortcut there, that there's maybe a bit more kind of richness in design rather than just saying these three options and that's it. So that could be, so these kind of low road options. I also have an idea about plaster facades, these kind of banal white plaster facades to insulate the facade. Maybe that could be a first design proposal by the AI instead of just making it straight. No, maybe there could be a layer of design there. So maybe it doesn't directly have to replace us. Maybe it can enrich us with inspiration in an earlier level, and maybe it can replace the kind of design practice where design is somehow unfavored, and then there could be a better designer than no designer. So
like a safety net for architecture.
Yeah.
I was wondering why you think we can't draw good plans yet. Like, do you think we'll be able to do it? Or is it too much to think?
So if you saw it on the images, all the images were made using photographs. No, all the facades are photographs, all the interiors were photographs, all the 3D models were in a way textured with photographic material. No, And the reason that it can deal so well with photographs is that these data sets, of course, contain endless photographs of buildings. Because if you're on a holiday and you take a picture of yourself, then there's many buildings in the background, no? Or if you take a picture of a monument. So it knows very well what our built environment looks like in a photographic realm, no? And therefore it's able to somehow find a lot of rich information about what that detail should look like. But the plan is, of course, black lines on a white background, no? And then there's no kind of, it's hard to make that kind of distinction between the style of black lines on a white background that Venturi drew or that project developers drew. And most likely the data set is endlessly bigger with these kind of scraped plans from emo websites, which are nonsensical, than kind of good architectural plans. So maybe there needs to be then a more concise data set, and I think there could be a future where that exists. But for now, I think it's not able to read that point in this kind of multi-dimensional cloud so well that it knows these are the plans that Cacciadominioni drew. No? It doesn't know that. It's just one big pile of black and white plans, and it's not able to find it. Yeah. But who knows in the future? Yes.
I have a question kind of following up about the data sets, because going back to the beginning, it was quite interesting, these images of the hotel rooms or the kind of nonsensical that came out of some of the early AI tests. And then in the work you've shown from the students, there's quite a bit of control with the data set you're inputting and the reference and bringing these things together, which I think also has this kind of really amazing quality. But I'm curious in the studio if you've also been doing some experiments where you're kind of inputting previous tests or kind of your own data into the data set, kind of this self-perpetual thing that we're also worried about with AI. And if you have, what have you kind of learned from these kind of experiments?
So a lot of the data that we use is synthetically altered also, no? So if it's a facade, of course we cut it out so that it doesn't only looks at the facade, but then there's still kind of messiness on the facade, no? And we use AI to somehow clean up the facade, to somehow make it kind of only about the architecture that we want to talk about. So it's already a kind of artificial input in that sense. But the rest of the images are just ways. They're almost, so these images that we put in are almost kind of maps that guide the model down into the kind of a cloud of the data set to know actually you're talking about this architecture in this kind of cultural context, no? But the data doesn't go into it doesn't generate from the image. It just uses the image to somehow travel down into this kind of this model, and then know that it has to make something new there, and that new thing that it creates from the larger data set. So there's no kind of input from the image that we put in the actually facade that we designed. It just generates in that surrounding. I mean, maybe following up, then there's also this very nice anecdote that I think I can could share. It's this kind of anecdote of the Library of Babel. I don't know if you know this kind of anecdote. It's this kind of story about this library that is that has books, and the first book is only a letter A, and the second book is two letter A's, and then there's all the amounts of letters, and then all the different possible combinations. So theoretically, in this library, there exists all the great books that were ever written, and all the great books that will ever be written. They already are there, no? And then the story goes out about this kind of endeavor to somehow find these books. People go down into this library with kind of ladders, and they go to the cupboards with all the books they take out are completely nonsensical, no? They never make any sense, and they really, and sometimes they find one after like years and years and years of searching, they find a book, it makes sense, and they bring it back up, and then there's a kind of this multi-generational endeavor to somehow use this library, which is then, yeah. So, but in a way, this AI is a kind of very funny version of this library of Babel, where it's in a way also not all the possible combinations. You can always discuss about what the kind of data set encapsulates and can it not be bigger? Okay, let's not have this discussion now. But definitely you could say large enough to make it believable. But every book that you take out somehow makes kind of sense, no? So that's a kind of very exciting new world where because of this kind of collapsing down this model, using these analogies to somehow have only the kind of analogies that matter, the surface. All the books somehow make sense. And I think the way we should look at kind of using AI is really to find ladders or kind of ropes or kind of picks, find ways to travel down into this model to really find the bookshelf that we are talking about. Because the problem now is with this kind of prompting, that everybody just prompts, I want a red brick house, and then you go to the shelf with the red brick houses, and there's this enormous stack of American red brick houses in front, and you just pick out the same book each time, no? Because that's just on display, and you don't go into the cupboard to get the book that actually says Oslo, red brick houses of this neighborhood, or with this, no, this kind of context. So I think what we need to find as architects in our profession is to find these tools to somehow to spelunk into this cave of this kind of model to find the right section. And I think that's also what the AI research are talking about. Not they are developing ways now to push you away from this kind of most obvious book. Yeah. Yes.
And to follow up a little bit, I think I remember you telling me that in the beginning you were just using your own data sets and not using the internet data set. That's it. You were collecting images and controlling it yourself. But this is less attractive now because this, let's say, communal data set on the internet with Gemini is so strong that it's more interesting to use. So it's more about how to use that regionally or critically or whatever. But earlier you were using local or your own data sets. Is this true, or
That yeah.
training your own model? This is not.
No, it's not. That wasn't really training. It was somehow extending an existing models. So there, the style again you would get. It's also very funny because there's a model that's trained on faces. This style again model, and then you would put in this kind of this facades by Ledoux. And then the first steps, you would see how these kind of faces slowly changed into these kind of facades. So there was also an understanding of composition based on these kind of faces in that model. So it's not completely pure, but it will be impossible to train it from scratch. Yeah. But the current techniques to somehow so you always start from a kind of pre-trained data set. It's impossible to train it from scratch on that level, no? And the current techniques is indeed to use a kind of single image, or then use Aurora, which is like a collection of images that somehow is around the subject that you, and these are really tools to get you down into the model, to that place that you want to talk about. Yeah. And if it doesn't exist in the model, it cannot be made. So that's true. But within our profession, I think it's a very bold saying, because we all use brick and plaster and metal. No, it's and glass. I mean, it's not like we're, and it's I'm arguing that there is a lot of novelty still to be found in this data set, and I don't think that we are so novel ourselves when we design a building in that sense, because we still need to design a building for a human body with a door that somehow, and a window that you can open, and there's still rain coming down from the top, so you still need a kind of patch to the roof, and so there's all these kind of conditions that somehow, yeah. So yeah, but okay, good.
Yeah, but thank you so much for.
Thank you for listening. How long?